Good. There you go.
All right, here we go. Going live. We are going live. And we are live according to my streaming. So let me just check that we're live. And yep, okay, we are. Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. I am with Randall of Trekker. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Duy?
I'm doing okay, given everything. So
yeah.
So
many of us answer that question. So many of us say that these days,
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of weeks after everything happened, I did a live stream with Danny Fingeroth, and we're talking about Iron Man, and I was like, but we're talking about Trekkerkickstarter.com. You are back on Kickstarter. I believe this is your 8th Kickstarter project.
It is, yeah.
We're talking Trekker: The Complete Journey, Volume 2, 528 pages, hardcover. I know I've asked you this before, but for the benefit of the people who have not heard our previous interviews, what is Trekker all about?
Trekker is a science fiction series about a young woman who's a bounty hunter. The structure of the series, it's a long form sort of coming of age story about this young woman who's got extraordinary abilities, but also a lot of challenges, a lot of blind spots, a lot of rough edges. And the series is really about her growth and evolution as a human being. That's one level of the journey that she's on, that sort of inward journey that we're all on, becoming human, At the same time, the story started off and the focus of the series, just like Mercy St. Clair, that's the name of the character, her own blinders are sort of narrow focus. She shoots people, she gets paid money, and that's good. But the series is all about gradually the world opens up and becomes more complex. She is called upon to play a larger role. So there's sort of a character of destiny story going on too. We move from the streets of a little grungy noir-like city out into the stars throughout the course of the series. So we start small and get really big. I'm swinging for the seats with Trekker. I try to do everything I love about science fiction in it.
Everything you love about science fiction and comics?
Yeah.
And I just realized I haven't recorded this. I know we're live streaming, but for the sake of archiving this, I'm going to press record right now.
Okay.
There you go. Okay. So again, this is your 8th Kickstarter project, and I believe every single one has been labeled a project we love by Kickstarter. Is that correct?
I think that's I haven't gone back and checked on that, but yeah, I think so. I managed to get on their Valentine's Day list every time.
I did notice you launched on Valentine's Day, Ron.
I did. That wasn't intentional. I was originally I was wanting to launch this campaign a couple of months earlier than I was able to. There was a delay. The printer did a first print of the book before this one, and the prints came to me and they were all flawed. There was a wrinkle in them on the entire print run. So they had to go back and do the entire print run all over again. And it was right around the holidays were coming on. So all printers were getting jammed up. Anyway, it's a long story. But so this campaign was supposed to have launched late last year, got pushed this year. And then I just kept waiting because I don't launch a new campaign until 2 things happen. The campaign before that is in the backer's hands, and the story for the new campaign is done. So the story was done and ready to go, but I just couldn't get the books to the backers because I had to get them from the printer first, So anyway, so it finally wound up that the second week in February seemed like it was as early as I could safely plan on launching the campaign. And lo and behold, and I always tend to launch on a Tuesday for various reasons, and it happened to be Valentine's Day. So once I recognized that, I said, well, I better lean into that a little bit.
Use a lot of romantic promotional material for Valentine's Day.
Yes, yeah.
I did notice, you said that you don't launch a Kickstarter until the first one is in the backer's hands, which implies really to me that having a Kickstarter is a lot of work.
It is a tremendous amount of work. There's just no point sugarcoating it or whatever. I often say to people, I did not get into doing comics to sell comics. I started off working at DC and Dark Horse and Marvel and stuff, and I would draw pages and turn them into the company. And that was my job, to draw the stories. Then with Trekker, which I started at Dark Horse many years ago, and I was allowed to create it there and write it and draw it, and I have full ownership of it. So I was doing more of the creation of the comic, but that was still just making the comic books, and that's what I wanted to do, you know. Then the publisher did all the other stuff, dealing with printers and shipping and solicitation and marketing and promotion, all that sort of stuff. Well, but now I'm doing Kickstarter all on my own. I'm a one-man show, so I have to wear all those hats of being the publisher and marketing and all that sort of stuff, as well as writing and drawing and coloring and lettering, all that stuff. So it's a lot of hats to wear. And anybody who is thinking about getting into doing Kickstarters, you go into it with your eyes open. be ready for it to be a real commitment if you want to really do it. You know, doing it halfway is a risky thing to do. You might very well not achieve your goals. I'll put it that way.
Speaking of achieving your goal, I know a lot of people go through Kickstarter and wait 4 weeks before achieving their goal. Some people never do. You know, 5.5 hours, Ron. You were funded in 5.5 hours.
Yeah, it was a shock to me too. I've gotten funded fairly early on some of the campaigns before, within the first day and a half. But especially for this one, because most of my campaigns are for brand new Trekker stories. They're like 120-page trade paperbacks, you know, soft cover books. This one is for, like you say, it's a hardcover book. It's 528 pages, collecting a bunch of the stories I've done already and putting them into this sort of more deluxe format, which a lot of backers, I got to say, they really love these hardcovers. But anyway, so launching a campaign like that, as probably comes as no surprise, it's a lot more expensive to have a printer make a 550-page deluxe hardcover book than it is a trade paperback. So that meant I had to ask for a lot more money up front just to cover the cost of printing the book and shipping. This book is going to weigh about over 4 pounds. So shipping charges are really steep on that. Not so much within the contiguous 48 US states, but anytime it's going overseas or whatever like that, oh man, the costs are just unreal. So I set a really high funding target, and I had no idea when I was going to hit it. I figured we would hit it because by now, thankfully, there are a lot of really enthusiastic and energetic Trekker backers out there. So I figured we were going to at least hit the funding goal and push beyond it somewhat. But I mean, I tell you, every time I run one of these campaigns, I feel like I'm jumping off the cliff. I don't know what's going to happen. So it was just surreal to see it funding that well.
You've really built quite a following, and we have a comment here from Darren and Ruth Sutherland, who I want to say are the biggest Trekker fans.
I don't think there's too much serious competition for the position. And others, meaning by that, yes, I think Darren and Ruth have been so supportive from very early on, from the very beginning, really, and do a lot to try to help, you know, get the word spread around for Trekker, and that's invaluable help to a creator like me who, again, I'm not built to be a marketer, or I don't know how to work those levers of the social media machinery. I do the best I can, obviously, because I'm invested in Trekker. But the help of some of the backers like Darren and Ruth, who are so good about networking and communication, and also when they recommend it to friends, it's not coming from, you know, me. It's somebody else, right? So yeah,
they said that we're looking forward to this hardcover collection. And Trekker Talk says that they love the Valentine's Day launch, a perfect day for Mercy and Molly. But the third comment that we get is from Austin A., who informs me that at this moment you have just surpassed your third stretch goal. So you didn't just meet your goal; you have met your third stretch goal, which I believe is a bookmark.
It's a cloth sort of ribbon bookmark, and that was. I was really sort of banking on that to get some energy for this campaign, because when I ran the first hardcover campaign about 3 years ago, I decided to shoot for that ribbon bookmark, and there were some people who were very excited to get that in the book. So I said, let's hope that happens again, and thank goodness it did. So it's doing well.
If you're just joining us now, we're with Ron Randall talking about Trekker, The Complete Journey, Volume 2, the second edition of the journey of sci-fi bounty hunter Mercy St. Clair. I almost said Molly St. Clair. It's Mercy St. Clair. Molly is her girlfriend.
Yeah.
do people need to get Trekker the Complete Journey Volume 1 in order to understand the story?
No. Honestly, this is something that is, I'm invested in doing this with every single Trekker book that I put out, whether it's the trade paperbacks. So of course it's going to apply to this hardcover. Every Trekker story starts off, and right at the beginning of the story, I try to establish who the characters are, the context for that story, just enough of the background that a new reader can get oriented and know what's going on. A new adventure or challenge or whatever is introduced in that story, and that story reaches a resolution within the covers of any single volume. So I want any of these books, I want it to work as a good, new reader friendly introduction to the world, tell an entire satisfactory adventure, and leave the reader thinking both, that was great, I want to see what happens next, and if they don't know about Trekker before that, I want them to say, this is really cool, I really get this world, and it's clear that some cool stuff happened before this. It would be neat to get that too. But this second hardcover actually it starts at a really great point in the series for a new reader, because it starts with Mercy and Molly are in their home city of New Gelaf on Earth. What's come before in the series has given Mercy some ideas and indications that life isn't going to be enough. That it's like when Frodo gets the ring. Oh, So we start off in their version of the Shire. It's a rundown film noirish version, a sci-fi version of it. But so this is really the beginning, in some ways, of the real quest that Mercy and Molly, who is her partner, they're going on. So it starts in a great starting point, their home city. There's an adventure there, so we get a sense of who Mercy is and has been, and then we take her out by steps and stages into the stars, each adventure building on the one before it, and it comes to a fairly decent climactic point by the end of the final page of it.
It is so this collects 5 volumes: Chapeltown, The Dark Star Zephyr, Battlefields, Hunter's Moon, and Reckoning on Rigel.
Right.
Reckoning on Rigel just finished. Wait, that was Blood in the Wind.
No. Yeah. So the Reckoning on Rigel, and then after Reckoning on Rigel, we did one more campaign for another trade, Blood in the Wind. Exactly.
So that one I could last year.
Yeah. And Blood in the Wind, I just couldn't fit that into this volume. This volume is designed to be exactly the same page count as Volume 1. I want the books to be as uniform as possible. And also, when I got Volume 1, which was the size it was, because that was all the Dark Horse material that had been out of print. All the earlier Trekker stories, I didn't have anymore, and Dark Horse didn't have anymore. So if I was at a convention or something, and somebody came up to my table and I had all the new Trekker stories, of course, one of the most natural questions is, where's the first one? And I have to say, you can't get the first one. And that's a terrible sentence to say when you're the creator of an ongoing series that builds from the first issue through the latest one. So eventually I ran a campaign to collect all those earlier stories, and that was a bunch. And then we had some bonus material at the end. So anyway, it was 528 pages long. I get that book and I said, this is as big a book as I think most people could even reasonably comfortably hold in their hand and turn the pages of, because I really want these things to be read. I'm here to tell stories. I'm not here to sort of create interesting artifacts. If there is a cool sort of physical, neat object quality to these books, that's great. But my primary mission is to tell Trekker stories. And I want you to get this book and turn the pages and read it. And I just thought if I made it any bigger than that, that's not going to happen. So Blood on the Wind will be the first volume, the first book in the next hardcover. Fingers crossed, right?
Of course. You said earlier that you created the series and Dark Horse published it a long time ago. I feel like a long time ago is an understatement.
Well, look at the color of my hair. We probably have different concepts of what a long time ago is. But yeah, it was back in the misty days of yore, one might say.
It was 1987, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that's when the first issue came out. I mean, I was working on it in '86. I'd met, and the reason I got such a sweet situation, like I described earlier, I was able to write and draw my own stories and retain full ownership of it. And Dark Horse published it for me. That's a pretty rare deal to get. But I'd been living in New Jersey for about 8 years, and I'd gone to school there at the Joe Kubert School, which I can't say, we could do a whole show about the Joe Kubert School and Joe. But I got to work directly under Joe, learned a lot about how to be a comic artist and kind of a person, a human from Joe as well. Anyway, so I was working, I was out there to get jobs at DC and Marvel, but I always knew I was going to move back to the Pacific Northwest. I did. And the summer that I moved back here, I was being a guest at a local little comic show, and Mike Richardson and Randy Stradley came up to me and introduced themselves and said they were just starting up a little comic book company. And they wanted to get some established professionals to come and work for them. This is right around the time when a lot of little independent black and white companies were starting up.
Yeah.
And anyway, so they made that offer to me and said, if you can come and work for us, we'll pay you, and you can do whatever you want. And if you want us to get a writer to work with you, if you want to write your own stories. And I couldn't hardly believe what I was hearing, because you just don't hear things like that very often. And I just said, I'm never going to have a chance like this again. So I just had to sit down and say, if I'm going to, because I was doing a regular monthly book at DC at the time. I was drawing the Warlord comic book. And I had a pretty sweet gig because I liked that book, and I was drawing a regular monthly comic book. Not many guys get to do that. And I said, if I'm going to leave a job like that to work for these guys who I didn't know who these guys were, their company, was it going to last more than, a few months and stuff? But I said, to make it worth the risk of doing that, I had to really come up with my dream project. And that's what Trekker is.
And so this always fascinates me. I'm not a creator, so it always fascinates me when I see something like this. You, as a human being, have, changed and evolved throughout those decades. How do you retain your attachment to Trekker, and how do you keep that a cohesive story, given that you yourself have changed in the time in between?
Right. Well, I had a couple of things going for me since I got to create it myself, and when it first came out at Dark Horse, I was able to work on it steadily, intensely, and exclusively for a couple of good years at the time when I was still a fairly young creator. So that stuff digs deep into you. Those characters really sunk into my subconscious or whatever, and they just lived in me. And from the very beginning, my object was to create a character in Mercy and the surrounding cast and an environment, a world that felt sort of believable. Back then, if you do a female driven story, they were usually sort of, dressed sort of, they were dressed like comic book women, if you know what I'm saying.
And it got worse in the 90s.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It got worse before it got better. But I wanted a character who was, I knew the kind of stories I wanted to tell I wanted them to have a certain amount of grit and texture and grounded in sort of a steamy, gritty reality. And so if I wanted a bounty hunter, she couldn't be dressed like a stripper or a burlesque dancer. I wanted her to be dressed with gear and straps and pads so she could go out and kick some ass and get her own ass kicked and still come back fighting.
Of course.
So and then also, and with her personality and everything, I just wanted to try to build a character that felt real and believable. And the result was she became real sort of in my own thinking. And I just carried that world around with me, so that as I would work on the series and have to leave it for a while and then get back to it for another story, there was never, what was I doing again? Or who was these characters? I mean, they were always just immediately accessible to me. And that's paid off really well. I think my goal is to have there be a real continuity from the very first page of Trekker that I drew in '87 to the page that I'm working on right now for the story that's going to follow after the Blood in the Wind story. I want a reader to be able to read it all. And while I want there to be, as I do with the character Mercy, a gradual evolution, each story that Mercy goes through, she has experiences, heartbreaks, triumphs, and that helps to shape and mold her. Me as a human being have had those, the series has those. As an artist, I've changed too. But I want those changes to be incremental and sort of organic, so that somebody reading a story now says, I'm reading a story that was written and drawn contemporarily, now, but without it being disjointed or discontinuous from what I did back in the 80s. It's a hard thing to pull off, maybe, except all I'm doing is I'm just sort of going where my gut takes me, trusting that my internal guidance system for this character, this world. I'm still passionate about the same kind of science fiction stories, comics, movies, novels that I was back then. And so I'm still drawing from the same well. And my hope is that sort of keeps me pretty much on the beam.
You were unable to work on Trekker for a long time, but were you always intending to go back to it?
Yeah. And when you say unable, what I should maybe clarify that I wasn't forbidden from it or physically incapable of it. It was that I hadn't been able to find a big enough audience that I could make a living doing it. So I had to take on other jobs with a pay rate and a paycheck attached to them. So that I would just scurry back to Trekker and do a little story over here as I could. And it was a very sporadic way to try to tell these stories, and I was doing a terrible disservice to the series and to the readers, who sometimes an issue would appear and then disappear. Couldn't find it, or backup stories in some random issues of Dark Horse Presents. So yeah, I put it on hiatus for about 12 years. Eventually, it was too frustrating, and I said, I'll get back to Trekker when I can find a way to pick up the pencil and start working on it, and not have to keep interrupting the story. Tell it so it comes out steadily and regularly until we get to the end of this journey. So when I figured out I could do that by first making a webcomic, and then gradually getting the stories back into print, and ultimately that's what led me to make the decision to go to Kickstarter. This is the one way that I can, between me and the readers, we have the fate of Trekker in our own hands. If we want these stories, we'll keep working and making them happen, and that's where we're at now. So was that? I forgot if that answered your question, or if you had something else.
Yes, you've done Trekker through single issues, parts of anthologies, web comics, and now constant trade paperbacks. What is your preferred format? This
one, really, honestly, when I started Trekker and I was doing it as in its own title at Dark Horse, did some backups, some anthologized or serialized stories in Dark Horse Presents, their anthology book. But when she got her own title, the stories were all supposed to be like 22, 24 pages long. But after, even by the second issue, I was like, it was 26 pages long, which they weren't that happy about, but they indulged me. They were very nice to me. But I was coming up with the constraints of wanting to tell stories that didn't fit into that neat rhythm of like a superhero comic, boom, 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 resolution. I wanted the stories to have a little bit more elasticity, more room to grow and expand. So being able to do these, put them out as these trade books, I can have the lead story can be 60 pages long if I want it to be that way. It can be 80 pages long, and then I always like to have at least one backup story, as it were, a second story in the back of the book. So I have that elasticity, and if the story feels like, well, I think a double page spread would really go well here. It would really open up the story, or just be a crescendo moment or something. I can do that. I have the freedom to do that if I think it serves the story really well. And it's just, that means every time the reader gets a book in their hand, it's a substantial read. If you do fund like floppies on Kickstarter, then maybe you're going 8 months, 10 months, a year between single issues of a comic. And I just like to be able to give the readers a bigger bite, a bigger chonk with each one they get.
Does it enable you also to space things out a little bit more? Because one of the things in Trekker that I noticed is, like, you did say, it's not like a superhero comic, and it is an action comic, but it is, in comparison to other action comics, not to be confused with the proper noun action comics, in comparison to other action comics, it also has a higher proportion of quiet moments. I feel more character driven.
That's probably true, and if anything, maybe more so as we've gone on. But from the very beginning, I wanted to be an action adventure series, but at core, as I said right at the top of our talk here, it's about Mercy's evolution as a human being. So those moments of the quieter moments, the more emotional moments, the interactions between characters, that's to me the meat and the juice of it all. If I was just doing a bang bang shoot 'em up, action adventure series, I would have gotten tired of this thing long ago. What keeps it fresh for me is the journey that Mercy is on as a human being, and also the fact that because of the structure of this series, she goes to each story is almost like a different subgenre of science fiction. There's a story where she's on a raw jungle planet, and it's her against a monster. I might be drawing, I don't know, a Predator comic or Tarzan out in the jungle against some beast, that kind of. I wanted that sort of a primitive sort of quality to it, very sort of feral. There are ones that are set in this North City. There's one on space stations. I just try to work in, there's a sci-fi Western one where she's in a dusty old town on another planet, and she meets the sheriff there, grizzled beard and that sort of stuff. So the fact that I could sort of shift the setting for each story is a fun stretch for me. And the hope is it's a little bit of a fresh change of pace for the readers too. But again, never a jarring one. The new settings, the new locations that Mercy is drawn to go to, it should always be an organic part of the journey that she's on. That's the integrity of the series is something that is absolutely of critical importance to me.
If you guys are just joining us, leave your comments in the chat for Ron Randall as we're talking about Trekker, something that he created that apparently can give him the leverage to draw whatever he wants when he wants to draw it.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but I mean, really, that's kind of what it is. Yeah. I guess I should hasten to say that because I've thought about this a lot when I first started to format these stories for the larger graphic novel format, as opposed to like a 22, 24 page comics or whatever. I know that there's always a chance that a creator can, it's like when a novelist gets to write one novel and it becomes a hit, and then the novels just swell in size from there on out and just become bloated and very fatty. They just become self-indulgent and almost lazy in some cases.
And it's the same novel every time.
And it's the same novel every time, yeah. But with Trekker, I had enough years drawing, especially, and then for a few years writing the stories that had that sort of taut, muscular sort of structure to them, that I always want Trekker to feel. I never want there to feel that there's any fat, even if the story is has some slow moments. Each one of those moments and scenes has to be there for a reason. It has to be serving the purpose of moving the story forward, adding something to the journey, to the stakes, the relationships between characters, all that stuff. I want it all to play a part. So hopefully I'm not veering into self-indulgence just because I get to draw whatever I want.
You mentioned that when you created Mercy St. Clair, there was not a lot. It was not great for female comic book characters at the time.
Yeah,
and it got worse before it got better. These days, there's been a lot of female protagonists. How do you think that has affected at all the way that you created Trekker?
I read some of those stories. I've seen some of the TV shows and movies, and I like a lot of them, and some of them I don't think are very well done. But I don't know that I can claim too much that's a direct influence on how I do Mercy. I think Mercy has kind of been baked in from the beginning to have the characteristics that this series does have. But like any creator, when I read a good book or I see a good movie, little bits of that can seep into what I'm doing. So I'm not saying that I'm impervious to being influenced by those things, and I'm not impervious to having my series enriched by those things either. Nobody would look at Trekker, for instance, and say, "Oh, this is a manga influenced book." But I've read some, not a lot, but I've read some manga and tried to pick up at least little bits here and there, panel rhythms, the blocking out of a certain scene, thing. Not the drawing style. That's I'm too I'm too stuck in my.
You're too Ron Randall.
I'm too much Ron Randall to do that, and again, it wouldn't feel like an organic shift in the series to me. So Trekker is what it is, but at the same time, if a little bit of fresh air from the year 2023, breathes into the next story, and if I feel if I can pull it off in a way again that can organically be woven into everything that already exists in Trekker, then I'm all for it. I don't want to do a comic that reads simply like a time capsule book that you could have read in 1987. I don't know how well I mean, I'm sure there are readers who or people who will glance at an issue of Trekker and say, "Oh, that's a very old school way of doing comic books." Well, I can't escape from those influences and don't want to. But again, I just don't want to. I want the stories at least to feel like they breathe and feel now as much as I can.
But in the, how do I put this? In the evolution of comics, the more the old school goes away, isn't there more of a reason? Like, isn't there like more of a niche to be filled by doing an old school comic?
Maybe there is. I I grew up loving the kind of storytelling that I learned from Joe Kubert and the comics I was reading at the time. And I believe that kind of storytelling delivers a really good story that can hit you in your heart and work on your head too. Um, and I'm just kind of all in on that. So as other approaches and styles and influences come into the medium at large, they'll do what they do, and sometimes I don't agree with a lot of what I see and read these days. So I mean, you can say I'm just on my little hill waving my little flag if you want to, I guess. But I do feel that there's a real enduring value in telling a story that just solidly, competently presented, where you get introduced to the characters, you make a connection, an emotional connection with that character. You may not like them, but you recognize yourself in them in one way or another. And then I always say what Joe Kubert, he would grab you by your lapels in the first page of a story, pull you into that story, and he would not let you go into the last panel of the last page. And you had an experience, man. You had been immersed into a story. And you can't do that if your storytelling fails you. If you drop panels or a sequence of panels, or the dialogue that you use doesn't hold the reader and keep them moving smoothly through the story you're trying to tell them. And I see a lot of what to me feels like storytelling mistakes one way or another with a lot of the work that I'm seeing out there. So I'm just trying to do really good, solid stories and hoping that number one, that I can amuse myself and my readers, and B, if also some creators can look at it and maybe pick up a pointer or two from me that I learned from the people that I learned from, and I'm passing that down along, then yeah, I'd like to think that maybe I'm serving a greater cause, as it were.
The first pull quote that you have on your Trekker Kickstarter page is from Gail Simone,
You're darn right,
writer,
yeah.
Wonder Woman, Birds of Prey, Red Sonja, among other things.
Yeah.
She says, "It's of stuff like Trekker that revolutions are begun, a female character that is sexy but not sexualized, that is tough but not without flaws and doubts, and that is dangerous but not without compassion." That is high praise from one of the greatest comics writers today.
Yeah, I was thrilled. I actually owed that to the guys at Dark Horse, or maybe they suggested anyway. When we were putting together an earlier omnibus through Dark Horse to collect some of the Trekker stories some 1 million years ago, that's also now out of print. But anyway, they said, we need to get somebody to write an introduction, and I said, well, if we could get Gail Simone, that'd be awesome, and we did, and she just blew me away with what she wrote. Now, the context of that quote, when you said it's of stuff like Trekker that revolutions are begun, she was talking about what we were talking about earlier, about the inception of Trekker, which came about in that time in the mid 80s, when this kind of female driven action adventure comic wasn't being done very much. And I wasn't doing Trekker necessarily to promote that as a cause. I just thought it was a cool idea and a cool story, and there's no reason it shouldn't be done. But yeah, Gail's a great writer, and you could hear it there in the words that she chose and the way she crafts sentences and phrases. It's amazing. And I admire her as a person and as a writer of strong female characters so much that getting that from her was a real plum.
It does prompt me to ask, did it wasn't created to champion a cause or anything, but did you initially conceive of Trekker as a female protagonist?
I did, yeah. I don't think I've given enough credit to a guy that I worked on a couple of years before Trekker. The first sort of regular ongoing gig that I had in comics was doing a backup story at DC called The Barren Earth, and it was written by a good buddy of mine, Gary Cohn. And it was like an Edgar Rice Burroughs sort of sci-fi story. The Earth has become a desert planet because the sun is in the process of becoming a red giant and it's baked. Anyway,
Poor Superman.
yeah, poor Superman. And it was a science fiction series that starred a female character, and she was tough and independent and smart, and we had a great time doing that. So a couple of years, and I said, this is great. I mean, as a little secret, a lot of artists like to draw pretty women. It's something we enjoy, and here was a chance I could draw a pretty woman, but she wasn't just sort of like she wasn't just the sidekick or the eye candy or the love interest. The story was around her, and I thought, this is great. This is the best of both worlds for me. And also, it was the novelty of having a female character in that sort of action adventure role, that setting, that was compelling too, because it felt fresh. So when I had a chance to create my own series, I knew right away I wanted to be a female lead character, and I very quickly, and I knew it was going to be science fiction because I love science fiction, as I've already said. And the idea about having her be a bounty hunter that just really worked for me. It would give me a chance to range. The stories could go lots of different ways, and it just immersed that story with a certain amount of gritty reality that I really wanted there from the beginning.
One of the things that happens early on in Trekker: The Complete Journey Volume 2, which is up on Kickstarter right now, go to trekkerkickstarter.com, is the evolution of Mercy and Molly's relationship, I believe.
Yeah.
So in the entirety of Trekker: The Complete Journey Volume 1, they are not together, and Mercy, I think, is dating men.
Yeah.
Is that something that you were always going to build up to, or did that happen over time?
It happened over time. Molly is in the very first Trekker story, I believe, or at least within the second one. But I knew from the beginning that I needed Mercy to have somebody that she would feel safe around, that she would feel that she could confide in. That was completely different than she is, as much as possible. And so then that's where Molly came from. But very quickly it just became apparent to me that there's got to be a reason that these two characters keep getting together. Whatever else is going on in Mercy's world, whatever is falling down around her, she always goes to Molly. And so it became apparent pretty early on in the series that there was something going on there. But when I realized, well, Mercy's kind of in love with her, and I thought, well, and then I had a dilemma. And the dilemma was, how do I make this happen in a way that, again, sort of feels organic, that feels like an evolutionary step that's not being done in an exploitative or sensational way. And I'm a straight white dude. What am I, But I sort of approach it the way I kind of approached the character from the very beginning. I said, what would a human being be likely to do in this kind of situation? And in a lot of ways, I think we all react the same when we're faced with personal revelations or having to be open and vulnerable or whatever it is, when we're betrayed, whatever. So, and I just wanted it to take its time. I thought the longer I can make this play out, the more hopefully organic it will be. And then when the revelation moment, when the aha moment happens for Mercy, I'll just have to see what happens with the readers, because I didn't know. Because up until then it had been a fairly traditional, series in lots and lots of ways. But even from the beginning, when Mercy was having a relationship with a guy, with a cop on the force, Paul Clemens, it's pretty clear that Mercy isn't really there for it. She's he's a great guy and he's trying to do all the right things, and but it ain't working. And there's got to be a reason it wasn't working, right? So, yeah, that stuff was there, sometimes not consciously at first, but again, very quickly I said, there are ingredients here. And it just came to the point where it felt almost like it was the inevitable thing. It was definitely the next step for Mercy's personal evolution of self-knowledge and growth and that stuff.
Darren in North Switzerland say, thank you for sharing your dream project with the world. Trekker Talk says, we love the double page spread illustration in Blood with the Wind with Nell and the Amber Swarm.
Oh, yeah.
And Austin A asks, do you ever feel it's challenging in balancing your many supporting characters with a main storyline?
Boy, yes, Austin, I do. Um, at the beginning of the series, it was pretty much Mercy and a small cast of characters, and she would have an adventure and she'd come back to her own little crummy apartment in the city, So it was kind of a constricted little world. But again, I knew from the beginning that the plan was for this thing to have a much larger scale, and that was going to require a bigger cast of characters. And so as the stories would go on, I would introduce characters and sort of establish them, and they would have some interaction here, and then Maurice would her story would take her elsewhere. But that character, in some cases, they got a role to play later on in the story. So yeah, I sort of feel like I need to be like one of those novelists who's got a big sprawling thing going on, and they've got to keep track of everybody and refresh our memory about who this character is and that stuff. So weaving those storylines in and out is it's a challenge. I hope I'm doing a decent job. I don't think I've let anybody that needs to be on the radar fall too far off of it, but we'll find out.
Ladies and gentlemen, go to trekkerkickstarter.com so that you can see the different tiers, including PDFs of the first 4 Trekker Tales. $25 gets you a PDF of the Complete Journey Volume 2. $50 gets you PDFs of both volumes 1 and 2. $65 for the Complete Journey hardcover, and $95 for 3 copies of the Complete Journey Volume 2. That is for retailers.
Right, that's for retailers. I mean, I wish more retailers would take me up on that. I would love it if Trekker books were in comic shops around the country and around the world, but I don't have a distribution system set up. I'm not a company. I'm just me. So right now, I'm pretty much, except for the few times when retailers do, pick up a few copies. God bless them. But mostly people have to get them from me on the Kickstarters or from an Etsy store that I have.
And $110 for both volumes 1 and volume 2, the hardcovers. You can also get $235. For $235, we'll get you an original ink wash commission with the hardcover. $425 will give you a watercolor commission, and $525. This is the big one. We'll give you only 5 are available. We'll give you an opportunity to appear in the book.
Yeah, I think all those are gone though, unfortunately. But
all those are gone.
They went really, really quickly this time. People like to be drawn into these stories and get a page that they appear on too. So yeah,
it is gone.
And
so actually, all the commissions are now gone.
The commissions are gone, but I did. I also made the commissions something that you could get as an add-on. So I have add-ons built into the campaign. So if you pledge for the book, then as you go through the process, this says, oh, here's some things you could add to that. So if somebody wants a commission from me, take heart. You can still get them through the add-ons. And they've gone so fast that I might have to add some more because I don't like to leave people disappointed. And, I spend most of my time absorbed in the world of creating Trekker. So sometimes getting a commission that's really from out of left field, a character I've never drawn before or someone I've drawn maybe years ago. It's kind of nice just to do a single illustration of somebody else once in a while. So I love doing the commissions.
And at the moment, you have 443 backers with 29 days to go. Of $35,000 as a goal, you have made $48,768. Congratulations, Ron.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a great first couple of days here on the campaign. I don't think there's any way you can say anything other than that, really.
I got a couple of last questions. The first one is, as an artist, how would you like to take us through how you created the design of Mercy St. Clair?
Wow, how I created the design. That was a case where I knew a couple of things from the beginning. I knew an overall sort of feel. I had an idea for who the character, her personality was, and of course what her job was going to be. And that goal of trying to make it something that was as convincingly real and had as much sense of reality about it as I could get. So certain things were off the table right off the bat. Not a lot of flesh showing, not high-heeled shoes, that sort of stuff. And I wanted short hair, a short, practical, but distinctive hair style. So I did that little swoop in her hair because it's a good idea for any character in comics. For you budding artists out there, if you're designing characters, have it so that there's something about their face that is really distinctive, that tags them as who they are. Anyway.
You know what I always said that about is Abby Arcane.
Yeah. That's a great case in point. You know,
Yeah.
Superman's got that little S curve on his
Hmm.
hair. So, um, but so I took my pencil and I just started doodling as we're just letting the pencil. I sketched a figure in a pose that seemed like it had some personality to it, and then I strapped on some pads. And this is the 1980s, so she had shoulder pads, um, and trying to figure out there'd be a couple of straps. So again, it would have that sense of gear to it, not like military gear, but like some sort of, you know, adventurer's gear stuff to it. Um, so it was really just sort of free association, coming up with some ideas from things I'd seen and been drawn to in other stories and stuff like that. Um, and really, it was the first the first design I drew was a really good starting point, and I think I modified and tweaked a few things about it, but it was pretty close right from the beginning. So, which to me said, yeah, I'm just sort of going deep down into my own, my own greatest, earliest loves, and trying to keep pulling from that well, and then filter it through all the years of experience and training and stuff that I had. So what comes out is something that's, refined and professional. But part of it's just all the wahoo little 7 or 12-year-old kid in me that just loved that kind of stuff.
Austin A asks, what future stretch goals are you contemplating for the campaign?
Oh, well, I can't tell you that, Austin. No, I can. So yeah, since we just hit the bookmark, I've got the next couple that are coming up are, and the way I structure my campaigns is the first stretch goals that I put out there are all ones to enhance the book itself, for a couple of reasons. Making the book cool is the primary objective, but also it just logistically it's better, it's easier. The more other things that I need to create, it just makes it that much more complicated to process, to run the campaigns and fulfill them and all that sort of stuff. So we start off with a couple more book enhancements. We're going to have the inside front and back covers, the end papers as they call them in hardcovers. We're going to have, instead of just being flat colors, we're going to have art on those. I'm going to put art on those. Will be the next one. And then we're going to do a thing that's called, I guess it's called debossing the cover. Like, it's instead of embossing, it's the illustration on the cover has Mercy and Molly, and there's a space background. So that will be pushed back a little bit. So the background of that image will be sort of indented on the cover a little bit, so that the border around it and the figures of Mercy and Molly should stand out a little bit, like they're framed. And that's on top of the spot gloss we're already putting on the figures, so that the book will have just a little bit more, almost like a framed piece of art will be what the cover is like physically. There'll be so that's the next couple that we have going on. And after that will be some other bells and whistles. The first hardcover campaign, I did a timeline poster where I just took the key stories and spelled those out there along with their publishing history. So I'll do some version of a second, timeline poster that would connect with that first one, if we get that far in the campaign. And I got a couple of other fun surprises after that I'm going to keep to myself for now.
And I think you can't answer this either. He's asking, how has Lieutenant Alex St. Clair been doing?
Oh, I can answer that one, I guess. Well, he's been back on Earth. That's Mercy's uncle. When I started the series, she's a bounty hunter who has an uneasy relationship with the police force, and I thought it'd be a nice twist to give her an uncle who's on the force. But he's still on Earth. He's doing his job there, but he's aware of what Mercy's doing out in the stars and the bigger forces at play there. So we probably have not seen the last of Alex St. Clair.
35 years later, you said earlier that you were having a hard time initially getting an audience for this book. 35 years later, you have 443 backers within the first 24 hours. How does that make you feel?
Vindicated, maybe. And what I mean by that is I had hoped that if I could, again, when I could get to the point of getting back to doing Trekker and have the stories come out in something of a regular, reliable, ongoing basis, that's how you can build an audience. Trekker isn't a loud series where an issue is going to come out and she's going to team up with the X-Men or whatever. There isn't something to draw attention to it that I in any way that I know how to do, other than to sort of quietly go about telling the best stories that I can. And I think that the only way that is going to catch a lot of eyes is to do it on a consistent, regular basis. And that was the theory that I went with when I turned to Kickstarter. And based on the way the campaigns have been growing, it seemed, that's why I said vindicated. I think I was right. At least I hope so. It feels like it.
One last question. I see your music collection behind you. If you had to select a theme song for Trekker and Mercy St. Clair, what would it be?
Well, when she was basically just a simple bounty hunter, it would have been One Way or Another by Blondie, because one way or another she's going to get the bad guy. And I guess in a way that's still what drives her the most. She is very much about the cause that she's after, and she won't let anything stop her.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ron. TrekkerKickstarter.com, everyone. Go get your copy of Trekker: The Complete Journey, Volume 2, as well as Volume 1.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Wade. This has been great.
And